The tension aboard the young explorer was palpable as Professor Krell's scales flickered between deep purple and agitated red. The veteran Zalarian educator stood before a view screen displaying a blue-green planet that looked deceptively serene against the backdrop of stars. "This," Professor Krell announced, tapping a clawed finger against the display, "is Earth. Classification: Deathworld Level 10. The highest rating in the Galactic Alliance database." His scales settled into a warning orange as he observed his students' reactions. Xyler, a sleek Lyran whose feline features typically projected confidence, couldn't suppress an audible scoff. The sound caused Professor Krell's head frills to rise slightly in irritation. "Something amusing, student Xyler?" the professor inquired, his voice carrying the dry tone that had intimidated generations of advanced comparative planetary sciences students. Xyler's whiskers twitched in that particular Lyran expression of skepticism. "With respect, Professor, we've studied the theoretical framework of Deathworld classifications extensively. But surely the Level 10 designation is exaggerated? The Alliance has established outposts on worlds with active volcanoes and toxic atmospheres." Around the classroom pod, Xyler's fellow students shifted in their adaptive seating arrangements. Grelia, an Aquarian whose shimmering amphibious skin required constant moisture, inclined her bulbous head in agreement. Beside her, massive Borak, a Gromite whose stone-like skin and powerful frame spoke of his high-gravity homeworld, rumbled his concurrence. Only Lyra, an elegant avian with iridescent feathers and hollow bones, remained silent, her keen eyes studying the planet with visible apprehension. Professor Krell's scales rippled into a pattern the students had come to recognize as amusement, though his voice remained stern. "The Galactic Alliance has maintained diplomatic relations with Earth for nearly 2 centuries. Yet every year, without fail, a new batch of students believes they understand Earth better than those who have actually experienced it." He gestured to the view screen, and the image changed to a series of data charts. "Earth's gravity is moderate by galactic standards, but still punishing for many species. Its atmospheric composition is corrosive to some life forms. Its climate variations are extreme. Its biodiversity includes millions of species, many of which have evolved astonishingly effective predatory or defensive capabilities." The professor paused, his scales settling into a deep blue. "But what truly earns Earth its Level 10 designation isn't merely these physical challenges. It's that this seemingly hostile environment produced humans, a species so uniquely adapted to their world's dangers that they've developed an astonishing resilience and unpredictability." He blinked his nictitating membranes slowly. "Your field trip begins tomorrow. We will visit 3 distinct Earth environments over a 6-day period. Every previous class has returned with a profound understanding of why Earth deserves its classification. I expect you'll be no different." As the students filed out of the classroom pod, Xyler found himself flanked by Grelia, whose amphibious body left a faint trail of moisture on the ship's floor. "You don't actually believe all that Deathworld mystique, do you?" Xyler asked her quietly. Grelia's large eyes blinked in the deliberate pattern that indicated data processing. "The classification appears statistically improbable given Earth's moderate orbital and composition metrics," she admitted. "However, Professor Krell's experiential data cannot be dismissed." "His experiential data includes watching students jump at shadows and insect bites," Xyler retorted. "With modern protective gear and medical countermeasures, I suspect this trip will be more tedious than dangerous." From behind them came the rumbling voice of Borak. Gromit's respect worthy challenges, the massive being stated simply. "If Earth is truly dangerous, it deserves study." Lyra, who had been gliding silently behind the group, finally spoke. "My species evolved on mountains with atmosphere so thin that others find it nearly unbreathable. Yet Earth frightens me. The historical data on human conflicts alone." "Historical data can be misinterpreted," Xyler interrupted. "Besides, humans themselves aren't even that physically impressive. No natural armor, mediocre sensory capabilities, average strength. Yet they hold considerable influence in the Alliance, observed Grelia. Xyler's tail twitched dismissively. Political maneuvering, not evolutionary superiority. As they reached their individual quarters, Lyra fixed Xyler with a penetrating gaze. "We shall see tomorrow, won't we?" The shuttle bay hummed with activity as the students assembled the following morning. Each wore adaptive environmental suits calibrated to their particular physiological needs. Professor Krell inspected them with critical eyes, his scales now a businesslike gray. "Today," he announced, "we begin with our first environment, a section of the expanded Amazon rainforest. Once we land, I'll be deactivating most of your suit support systems." A chorus of protests erupted, loudest from Xyler. The professor's scales darkened. "You will retain basic medical monitoring and emergency communication. Nothing more. You cannot truly understand Earth through a protective bubble." Before further objections could be raised, he ushered them into the landing shuttle. The descent was smooth, giving the students a spectacular view of an endless green canopy stretching to the horizon, veined with massive winding rivers. Heat signatures from countless life forms pulsed across their view screens. The moment the shuttle touched down in a small clearing, humidity enveloped them like a living entity. Professor Krell tapped commands into his wrist unit, and suddenly Xyler felt the full weight of Earth's gravity upon him. His specially designed suit, now functioning as little more than clothing, offered no assistance. The air was thick, wet, and almost overwhelmingly oxygen-rich to his Lyran physiology. "By the void," gasped Lyra, her avian frame clearly struggling with the dense atmosphere. Her chest heaved with the effort of breathing. Even mighty Borak seemed momentarily disoriented, though he adapted faster than the others, his species having evolved on a higher gravity world. "Gravity acceptable," he rumbled. "Air, strange." Grelia appeared the most comfortable, her amphibious nature somewhat suited to the humidity, though she blinked rapidly as sweat beaded on her skin in a way that never happened in her aquatic homeworld. "Welcome to Earth," Professor Krell announced, his own environmental adjustments seemingly minimal. "This is a relatively stable region with moderate temperatures by Earth standards, approximately 35 degrees Celsius with 90% humidity. Uncomfortable for most of you, but not immediately threatening." Xyler tried to project confidence despite the heaviness he felt in every limb. "It's unpleasant, but hardly deadly," he noted, though his usual grace was compromised as he moved. The professor's scales flashed in patterns too quick to interpret. "Follow me. We'll collect preliminary samples while I explain the basic ecosystem." They hadn't gone more than 50 meters when the skies suddenly darkened and rain began to fall, not in gentle drops, but in a torrential downpour that seemed to materialize without warning. Within seconds, they were drenched. "Temporary shelter," Professor Krell called, pointing to a rock outcropping that offered minimal protection. As they huddled beneath it, the true assault began. It started with tiny pinpricks of pain on Xyler's exposed fur. Looking down, he saw minuscule flying creatures landing on him, inserting proboscises into his skin. Around him, his classmates were experiencing similar attacks. Grelia's reaction was most severe, her sensitive amphibian skin erupting in painful welts where the creatures touched her. "Earth mosquitoes," Professor Krell identified calmly, seemingly unperturbed as he brushed several from his scales. "This variety has adapted to feed on a variety of blood types, including non-terrestrial ones. They can transmit numerous pathogens, though your immune boosters should handle those. There are thousands of them." Lyra cried, her wings pulled tight against her body as she frantically swatted at the clouds surrounding her. While they battled the mosquitoes, Xyler noticed movement on the ground. A column of tiny red creatures was advancing toward them with military precision. "Professor," he began, but Krell had already noticed. "Fire ants. Move. Now." For the first time, urgency colored the professor's voice. They abandoned their shelter, rushing back into the rain, which had at least diminished the mosquito swarm. Zyler's academic curiosity momentarily overcame his discomfort. "Why are they called fire ants?" he asked. He received his answer moments later when Borak, moving too slowly, had several crawl onto his foot. The massive gromite let out an uncharacteristic yelp of pain. "They burn," he exclaimed, trying to brush them off, only to have them attached to his hand as well. "Their venom contains compounds that create an intense burning sensation," Professor Krell explained, helping Borak remove the tiny attackers. "To a creature of your size, they're merely painful. To smaller Earth organisms, a colony can be lethal." As they regrouped in a new location, Lyra, drawn by vibrant colors, reached toward a beautiful, flowering vine. Professor Krell's hand shot out with surprising speed, pulling her back. "That," he said gravely, "is known locally as beautiful death. Its nectar contains a neurotoxin that would cause respiratory failure within minutes, even for your enhanced physiology." Lyra's feathers flattened in shock. "But it's so appealing." "Many deadly things on Earth are," the professor replied. "It's a common evolutionary strategy here. Attract prey with beauty, then kill." They spent 3 more hours in the rainforest, each minute bringing new discoveries and dangers. They documented plants that could cause paralysis through mere skin contact, spiders whose venom could dissolve tissue, and fungi that released hallucinogenic spores. The constant weight of gravity, the oppressive humidity, and the persistent attacks from insects left them exhausted. When they finally returned to the shuttle, Zyler collapsed into his seat, his fur matted with sweat and his skin covered in welts. Grellia looked even worse, her amphibious skin having reacted severely to multiple toxins. Borak was the least physically affected, but seemed deeply disturbed by the experience. Lyra trembled slightly, her avian metabolism pushed to its limits. "What you've experienced," Professor Krell told them as the shuttle ascended, "is merely the greeting that Earth offers visitors. We encountered no predators larger than your hand, experienced no severe weather events, and avoided the truly dangerous plants. Yet each of you has suffered more environmental stress in 3 hours than most of you experience in a standard year on your homeworlds." Zyler wanted to object, to maintain his skepticism, but the evidence of his own experience was undeniable. Something in his expression must have shown this realization, as Professor Krell's scales briefly shifted to a satisfied blue before returning to their professional gray. "Rest well tonight," the professor advised. "Tomorrow we visit the enhanced Serengeti." The night aboard the young explorer was filled with medical treatments and subdued conversations. The students' confidence had been visibly shaken, though none, especially Zyler, wanted to admit it openly. When morning came, Professor Krell briefed them on their second destination. The Serengeti ecosystem has adapted to climate change over centuries. The predators there have evolved accordingly. We will observe from a distance, then collect samples from safer areas. The shuttle descended toward vast golden plains dotted with isolated trees and herds of large herbivores. From above, it seemed peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaotic density of the rainforest. "Don't be deceived by the apparent tranquility," Professor Krell warned as they landed. "This environment is just as deadly, but in different ways." Once again, their support systems were deactivated. This time, the challenge was different. Instead of humidity, they faced intense dry heat and blinding sunlight. The open spaces offered no shelter, and the wind carried dust that irritated eyes and breathing passages. "Stay together," the professor instructed. "Movement attracts predators." They walked to a slight elevation that offered a view of a watering hole approximately 2 kilometers away. Through observation equipment, they witnessed several species of massive herbivores gathering to drink. "Those are earth elephants," Professor Krell identified. "Highly intelligent, social creatures. Despite their peaceful appearance, they can be extremely dangerous when threatened." As they watched, the atmosphere around the watering hole suddenly changed. The elephants formed a protective circle around their young. From tall grasses emerged several sleek, powerful predators that moved with astonishing coordination. Neo-lions, the professor explained, evolved from an Earth species called lions after genetic shifts caused by environmental changes. They're approximately 30% larger than their ancestors and have developed more complex pack hunting strategies. The students watched, mesmerized, as the predators executed a sophisticated attack, separating a younger elephant from the herd through a series of feints and coordinated movements. What followed was both fascinating and disturbing. The efficient, brutal takedown of a creature many times their individual size. They hunt in three-dimensional patterns, Grellia observed, her scientific interest temporarily overriding her distress. Not just surrounding their prey, but accounting for escape vectors with statistical precision. Yes, Professor Krell agreed. Earth predators display problem-solving abilities that go beyond instinct. They learn, adapt, and pass knowledge to offspring. Their observation was interrupted by a strange sound for Borak. The massive gromite was no longer beside them. In their absorption with the distant hunt, they hadn't noticed him wander off, apparently to examine a rock formation. Borak, Professor Krell called, his scales flashing urgent red. Return immediately. But it was too late. A different predator, one that had been nearly invisible against the golden grass, was stalking the isolated student. It resembled an enormous reptile with powerful limbs and camouflage scales. Evolved crocodilian, the professor identified tersely. Extremely dangerous. Xyler, Lyra, create a diversion. Grellia with me. Without thinking, Xyler found himself moving, his natural Lyran agility serving him well despite Earth's gravity. Lyra took to the air briefly, her wings struggling in the dense atmosphere, but managing short glides. Together, they shouted and moved in erratic patterns, drawing the predator's attention away from Borak. The reptilian hunter paused, its ancient brain calculating which prey was more vulnerable. This hesitation gave Professor Krell and Grellia enough time to reach Borak and begin guiding him back toward the group. The predator, deciding, began moving toward Xyler with frightening speed. Despite his training and natural quickness, Xyler realized he couldn't outrun it on unfamiliar terrain under Earth's gravity. Terror gripped him as he faced a death his academic knowledge hadn't prepared him for. Just then, Lyra dove from above, screaming a piercing avian cry that startled the predator. In that crucial moment of distraction, Professor Krell activated an emergency sonic deterrent, one of the few technological aids he'd kept in reserve. The high-frequency sound drove the creature back long enough for the group to retreat to the shuttle, hearts pounding and breath coming in ragged gasps. That was foolish, Professor Krell reprimanded Borak once they were safely inside. Never separate from the group in predator territory. Borak's rocky features showed genuine contrition. The formation resembled gromite, sacred stones. I was distracted. Xyler, still trembling slightly, found himself unusually subdued. That creature, it moves so fast. I've never felt so hunted. You were hunted, the professor stated simply. Earth's predators have evolved through millions of years of competition. They are efficiency perfected. Lyra's feathers remained puffed in lingering fear. You saved his life, she said to Xyler. You didn't hesitate. Before Xyler could respond, the skies darkened with alarming suddenness. The wind rose from nothing to howling within seconds. Dust storm, Professor Krell announced. We need to secure the shuttle. Even with its advanced technology, the shuttle rocked violently as the storm engulfed them. Visibility dropped to zero, and the sound of particles battering the hull was deafening. For nearly an hour, they endured the assault, the professor explaining matter-of-factly that such weather events were common in this region and could strip exposed flesh from bones. When the storm finally passed, they were half buried in sand and dirt. The cleaning systems would need hours to restore full functionality. That concludes today's field study, Professor Krell announced. We've experienced just two of Earth's dangers, apex predators and extreme weather events, both of which can materialize with minimal warning. As they returned to orbit, Xyler found himself speaking with unusual humility. I understand now why isolation is dangerous here. We needed each other. The professor's scales shifted to an approving blue. A crucial lesson. On Earth, cooperation isn't merely beneficial. It's often essential for survival. That evening, medical treatment was again necessary. Though the injuries were different, muscle strains from moving under unaccustomed gravity, sunburn, dehydration, and stress-induced symptoms. The students spoke more openly about their experiences, comparing observations and reactions. Our final destination tomorrow, Professor Krell informed them during their evening meal, is a human settlement. Specifically, the outskirts of a partially abandoned megacity in what was once called North America. This will be our most challenging environment, not because of natural dangers, but because it will bring you into contact with the most unpredictable element of Earth, humans themselves. The thought should have been comforting, a return to civilization after 2 days in the wilderness. Instead, Xyler felt a new kind of apprehension. The rainforest and savanna had been dangerous but comprehensible. From what they'd studied about humans, he wasn't sure the same could be said of their third destination. The outskirts of the megacity presented a landscape unlike anything they'd seen before. Massive structures of concrete and metal rose from the ground, many partially collapsed or reclaimed by vegetation. The area appeared to have suffered some environmental catastrophe, perhaps flooding or extreme weather, and had been partially abandoned. This region experienced significant climate-related disasters approximately 50 Earth years ago, Professor Krell explained as their shuttle landed on a relatively clear area. Rather than rebuild, the central government relocated much of the population. However, some humans chose to remain, adapting to the new conditions. They live in ruins? Grelia asked, her large eyes taking in the decaying infrastructure. They've repurposed what remains, the professor corrected. Humans are remarkably adaptable. You'll observe how they've created functional communities using salvaged materials and technology. As they prepared to disembark, the professor activated their optical camouflage systems. We'll observe without interacting initially. The Alliance has agreements with Earth governments, but this is a semi-autonomous region with limited official oversight. Caution is warranted. They moved through the strange landscape, witnessing how nature and artificial structures had merged. Plants grew from the sides of buildings, and wildlife had taken up residence in abandoned structures. Occasionally, they spotted evidence of human habitation, gardens growing in unusual containers, solar panels arranged on rooftops, and water collection systems. Their resourcefulness is impressive, Lyra observed quietly. Necessity drives innovation, Professor Krell replied. Humans excel at finding solutions with limited resources. They continued their exploration, collecting data on how the ecosystem had adapted to the presence of artificial materials. The professor explained how many Earth species had evolved to utilize human-created environments, sometimes developing entirely new behaviors or physical adaptations. Their observation was progressing smoothly until a sudden electrical failure caused their camouflage systems to flicker. The malfunction lasted only seconds, but it was enough. A group of humans who had been gathering materials from a collapsed structure spotted them. "We've been compromised," Professor Krell stated calmly. "Maintain positions." The humans, 6 individuals of varying ages, reacted with immediate wariness. They carried improvised tools that could double as weapons and moved with practiced coordination to form a defensive perimeter. "They're protecting their territory," Borak observed. "And each other," added Grelia. "Note the formation. They've positioned the physically smaller individuals in the center." Professor Krell addressed the humans in what Xyler recognized as an Earth language, but communication was clearly limited. One elderly human seemed to understand fragments, responding in halting Alliance standard. "They're cautious, but not immediately hostile," the professor translated. "I've explained we're an academic expedition. They're evaluating whether we pose a threat." The tension was palpable as the two groups assessed each other. Xyler noticed how the humans' eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, never focusing exclusively on one potential danger. Their posture suggested readiness for either fight or flight. The fragile moment of uncertainty shattered when one of the younger humans, perhaps misinterpreting a movement from Borak, raised an improvised weapon. The massive Gromite instinctively shifted into a defensive stance, which the humans perceived as threatening. Within seconds, the situation escalated. The humans spread out, using the terrain with practiced efficiency. One launched a projectile that struck near Lyra, causing her to emit an alarmed avian cry. Professor Krell attempted to maintain communication, but the universal translator struggled with the local dialect. "We need to withdraw," the professor decided, but retreat was complicated by the human strategic positioning. They had effectively cut off the direct route back to the shuttle. Just as the confrontation seemed inevitable, a new threat emerged. The ground trembled, and from a partially collapsed structure came a pack of large, wolf-like creatures, another example of Earth fauna that had adapted to the changed environment. The predators, drawn by the commotion, assessed both groups as potential prey. In an instant, the dynamic shifted. The human leader shouted commands, and their formation changed to address this new threat. Their adjusting strategy, Grellia observed with scientific detachment despite the danger. "So must we," Professor Krell replied. "The predators are the primary threat now. If we assist the humans, we may resolve both problems." With quick instructions, the professor coordinated their response. Borak used his massive strength to create noise and distraction. Lyra, despite her struggle with Earth's atmosphere, managed short aerial maneuvers to confuse the pack. Grellia and Professor Krell used their scientific knowledge to identify and target the alpha predator. Xyler found himself working alongside a young human who showed remarkable agility. Without words, they established a rhythm, using coordinated movements to herd the predators away from both groups. The humans, initially surprised by this cooperation, quickly adapted. They integrated their tactics with the students, creating a unified defense that drove the predators back toward the ruins. When the immediate danger passed, both groups faced each other again. But the dynamic had fundamentally changed. The human leader stepped forward, offering what was clearly a gesture of wary appreciation. Professor Krell responded in kind, and a tentative communication began. The elderly human, with limited alliance language, served as an imperfect translator. "They're surprised by our intervention," the professor explained to the students. "It seems other off-world visitors they've encountered have been less collaborative." Through halting translation, the human leader invited them to their settlement, not as potential threats, but as temporary allies. Professor Krell accepted with appropriate caution. The human community proved fascinating. Built within and around the ruins of former structures, it demonstrated ingenious use of limited resources. Solar and wind energy powered essential systems. Gardens grew in unlikely spaces. Reclaimed materials have been transformed into functional tools and modest, comfortable living spaces. They've created a sustainable ecosystem within a collapsed one, Grellia observed, her scientific mind clearly impressed. As they were shown around the settlement, Xyler found himself walking alongside the young human who had fought with him. Despite the language barrier, they managed basic communication through gestures and the few words the universal translator could process. The human pointed to a scar on Xyler's arm from the rainforest insects, then displayed several of their own scars, nodding with what seemed like respect. The message was clear: survival here required paying a physical price. Through the elderly translator, Professor Krell engaged the community leader in deeper conversation, learning about their history and challenges. The students gathered around, their academic interest fully engaged as they heard firsthand accounts of human adaptability. The humans described weather events that destroyed entire sections of the city, resource conflicts with other communities, and predator adaptations that required constant vigilance. Yet amid these hardships, they had maintained not just survival, but a functioning society with art, education, and a clear ethical framework. Ask them why they stayed, Xyler requested of the professor. when others relocated. The question, once translated, provoked animated discussion among the humans. The leader's response, conveyed through the translator, was both simple and profound. This is home. We adapt. We endure. This is what humans do. As evening approached, the humans shared a communal meal, with appropriate accommodations for their visitors' dietary requirements. The atmosphere had transformed from tense standoff to cautious cultural exchange. During this gathering, Zyler observed countless details about human behavior. Their constant awareness of surroundings even while socializing, their complex emotional expressions, the way they seamlessly shifted between serious planning and spontaneous humor. Most striking was how they included even the youngest and oldest members in decision-making, valuing different perspectives. The leader approached Professor Krell with a proposal, conveyed through their imperfect translation. The students could remain overnight to observe more of their community if they wished. After conferring with the students, the professor accepted. This is an unprecedented opportunity, he told them. Direct observation of human social structures is rare for academic groups. That night, as the settlement prepared for darkness with well-practiced security protocols, Zyler found a moment to speak privately with a young human who had fought alongside him. Using a combination of gesture, draw signs, and a few translated words available, they managed a rudimentary conversation. Zyler tried to express his curiosity about how the human faced constant danger with apparent ease. The human's response, laboriously translated, seemed to indicate that danger was simply a fact of existence, neither to be feared nor ignored, but addressed practically. When Zyler inquired about the human's obvious survival skills, the response included a demonstration of various techniques for evading predators, finding water, and interpreting environmental warnings. Many of these skills seemed instinctive rather than formally taught. Most revealing was the human's curious questions about Zyler's own world. When Zyler described the controlled environments and safety protocols of his home planet, the human's expression conveyed something between astonishment and perhaps pity, as if a life without regular challenge seemed incomplete. As night deepened, the settlement security teams maintained vigilant watches. Professor Krell took shifts with the students, ensuring they observed the humans' nocturnal adaptations and defense strategies. In the quiet hours, Zyler found himself reflecting on everything they'd experienced. The rainforest with its countless small killers, the savanna with its efficient predators, and now this community of beings who had made a home in the ruins of their own civilization's excess. Each environment represented a different facet of Earth's challenges, yet humans had evolved to thrive in all of them. Morning brought preparation for departure. The humans, now recognizing the academic nature of the visit, shared additional information about local conditions and even presented the students with small artifacts, handcrafted items that demonstrated their technological ingenuity despite limited resources. As they prepared to return to their shuttle, the settlement received an alert from their perimeter sensors. Another group of humans, described through translation as resource competitors, though Professor Krell privately suggested raiders might be more accurate, was approaching. The settlement mobilized with impressive efficiency. Defensive positions were assumed, vulnerable community members were moved to secure locations, and carefully hoarded resources were hidden. "We should withdraw immediately," Professor Krell instructed his students. This is an internal human matter, but their departure route was compromised by the approaching group. They would have to either wait for the situation to resolve or find an alternative path through potentially dangerous territory. Before a decision could be made, a section of damaged building near their position collapsed without warning, a structural failure triggered by recent weather or perhaps vibrations from their movement. Grellia was trapped beneath debris, not critically injured but unable to free herself. The sound attracted attention from both human groups. The settlement defenders, recognizing allies in trouble, diverted precious resources to assist. Several came to help extract Grellia, exposing themselves to potential danger from the approaching raiders. The situation escalated quickly. The raiders, spotting both the settlement defenders and the alien visitors, assessed the unusual situation as a potential advantage. They advanced more aggressively. In the chaos that followed, Xyler witnessed human adaptability at its most impressive and terrifying. The settlement defenders executed complex strategies with minimal communication. They used the environment, improvised weapons, and psychological tactics with devastating effectiveness. The students, unable to remain neutral given Grelia's predicament and the settlement assistance, found themselves reluctantly involved. Borok's strength proved valuable in moving obstacles. Lyra's limited flight gave them observation advantages. Xyler and the young human fighter again found themselves working in instinctive coordination. What impressed Xyler most wasn't the settlement's fighting capability, but their restraint. When the raiders, outmatched by the combined forces, retreated, there was no pursuit beyond securing the perimeter. The defenders immediately shifted focus to treating injuries and repairing defenses. They could have eliminated their enemies, Xyler observed to Professor Krell as they helped tend to Grelia's minor injuries. They chose not to. Efficiency, the professor replied, his scales showing thoughtful blue patterns. Humans understand resource conservation, including the resource of human life. Unnecessary killing creates future problems. Vendettas, orphaned offspring who grow to become enemies, waste of potential trading partners or knowledge sources. That's remarkably pragmatic, Grelia commented, wincing slightly as her wounds were cleaned. Pragmatism is perhaps humanity's defining characteristic, Professor Krell said. They balance immediate survival needs against long-term planning in ways few species master. With the immediate crisis resolved, they finally prepared to depart. The settlement leader, through their imperfect translator, extended an open invitation for future academic visits, a rare privilege. As they boarded their shuttle, Xyler looked back at the patchwork community. The young fighter raised a hand in farewell. Xyler returned the gesture, feeling a connection that transcended their biological differences. Once in orbit, the student spent the journey back to the young explorer in uncharacteristic silence, each processing their experiences. Even with support systems restored and medical treatment underway, the psychological impact of their 3 days on Earth lingered. The final debriefing took place in a classroom pod. Professor Krell, his scales now a calm professional blue, invited each student to share their conclusions. Borok went first, his rumbling voice solemn. Earth challenges through many methods, not just strength against strength. Many small dangers become large threat. Requires constant vigilance. Lyra spoke next, her feathers finally settled after days of stress-induced puffing. The environmental extremes were even more severe than our study suggested. The shift from rainforest to savanna to urban ruin required completely different survival strategies with minimal transition time. Grelia, her amphibious skin still showing evidence of Earth's assault despite medical treatment, offered her analysis. The statistical likelihood of survival for individual organisms is remarkably low, yet the ecosystems themselves demonstrate extraordinary resilience. This paradox suggests that Earth has evolved to use individual mortality as a driver of collective adaptation. Finally, all eyes turned to Xyler. The Lyran student who had begun the journey with such skepticism sat silent for a moment before speaking. "Understand now," he said simply. "Earth isn't a death world because of any single factor. It's a death world because it combines thousands of lethal elements, any one of which might be manageable alone, but together create an environment that constantly tests its inhabitants." He paused, considering his next words carefully. But what makes Earth truly deserving of its Level 10 classification isn't the planet itself. It's that these conditions produced humans, beings who don't merely survive Earth's dangers, but somehow incorporate them into their identity. Xyler's tail twitched as he struggled to articulate the realization. They don't just endure, they expect challenge. They've internalized risk assessment, adaptation, and resource management to a degree that makes them uniquely unpredictable. In 3 days, I observe humans perform acts of calculated violence, remarkable altruism, practical innovation, and subtle social maneuvering, sometimes simultaneously. Professor Krell's scales displayed a pattern none of the students had seen before, a deep, satisfied indigo that suggested genuine approval. This, the professor said quietly, is precisely why the Galactic Alliance places such importance on these field trips. Theory cannot convey the reality of Earth. It must be experienced. He turned to the view screen, where Earth still hung in the blackness. Humanity's influence in galactic affairs often puzzles those who have never visited their homeworld. How could beings from such a hostile planet, with relatively modest technology and limited natural advantages, achieve such prominence? The professor's scales rippled with amusement. Now you understand. They became influential because of their homeworld, not despite it. Earth didn't merely shape human biology. It forged their psychology, their social structures, their entire approach to existence. As the young explorer prepared to depart Earth's system, Xyler found himself in the observation dome, watching the blue-green world recede. He was joined, unexpectedly, by Professor Krell. "You showed promise," the professor commented, "particularly in how quickly you adapted your thinking when evidence contradicted your theories." Xyler's whiskers twitched in embarrassment. "I was arrogantly wrong." "Being wrong is an essential part of science," Professor Krell replied. "What matters is how we respond to the discovery of our errors." After a pause, he added, "Have you considered specializing in Deathworld studies?" The question surprised Xyler. "I hadn't, but after this experience, the Alliance needs researchers who understand worlds like Earth," the professor continued, "especially as we encounter more Level 8 and 9 environments in our expansion." Xyler considered this as Earth became a distant point of light. "The humans we met, they've never known anything different, have they? That constant vigilance, that readiness for disaster or conflict, it's their normal." "Yes," Professor Krell confirmed. "And yet they still create art, form deep social bonds, pursue knowledge, and dream of better futures. Perhaps that, more than their survival skills, is what makes them remarkable." As the ship entered hyperspace, Xyler made a private resolution. He would pursue Deathworld studies, not merely to understand the physical challenges of such environments, but to comprehend how they shaped the psychology and culture of their inhabitants. In the classroom pod, Professor Krell reviewed the roster for next semester's field trip with a subtle smile playing across his scales. Another group of brilliant, overconfident students would soon face the reality of Earth. Like every class before them, they would return changed, hopefully with the same newfound wisdom his current students had acquired. Earth, that beautiful death world, still had many lessons to teach the galaxy.